Hello, in this video I'm going to show you my development setup for machine learning applications using WSL, which is running on Windows 10. But before diving into the setup, I would like to introduce you to WSL and why I am using it. WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. It is a compatibility layer that allows you to run Linux binaries on Windows. So what are the advantages? Performance. WSL is much faster than running a VM or dual booting Windows and Linux. This is because WSL is built on top of Windows kernel, which means that it can access Windows Subsystem resources and drivers. Second one is integration. WSL is fully integrated with Windows. This means that you can use Windows apps and tools alongside Linux apps and tools. You can also access your Windows files from Linux and vice versa. The third is ease of use. WSL is very easy to use. You can install it with a single command and it's just like using any other Linux distribution. WSL is a powerful tool that can be used for a variety of purposes. If you are looking for a way to run Linux on Windows, WSL is a great option. Let us now look at how the architecture would look like. So, on the left hand side is my setup of Windows 10. On top of it, I'm going to use WSL, and the distribution that I'm going to use is Ubuntu. I'm going to make use of Git, which is pre-installed with the Ubuntu distribution. On top of this, I'm going to install ZSH shell. It's just an alternative to Bash shell. Then I'm going to install Python using Miniconda. The other tools that I'm going to use is Visual Studio Code, which will be installed within Windows 10, but it will access all the code that resides in our WSL. Similarly, for deployment of applications, I'm going to use Docker, which will again be integrated with the WSL setup we have. Now let's dive into the setup part. From the start menu, run Windows PowerShell as an administrator. To see a list of options of Linux distributions that you can install within WSL, you can type this command. I'm going to install Ubuntu for my setup, and I will do it with this command. -d specifies the distribution that you want to install. This process of installing Ubuntu distribution in WSL can take 5 to 10 minutes. It seems the installation is now complete. The terminal is initializing some stuff. Once the initialization is done, I will be required to set up the username and password for this Linux distribution. When I type the password, the keystrokes may not be visible in the terminal, but the password is being recorded in the terminal. Now that we have installed WSL, I will launch a command prompt window and check the version of the WSL we are using. It seems that we are using version 1. To update it to the latest version, we would use this command. It may happen that you do not have an updated kernel of WSL. In that case, you'll be required to visit the URL which is mentioned in the output of the above command, this particular URL, and after visiting it, we have to download the kernel package. Once the download of this kernel package is done, you have to click on the installation file and complete the setup of it. After the setup is complete, run the set version command again and recheck the version of the updated WSL. It will show us that the update has been done. From the start menu, now launch Microsoft Store. Once the store is opened, you can type terminal in the search bar, and from all the options you have available, select the first one. Install this terminal. Open the terminal after the installation is complete. We will now configure our terminal. You can see that we have several tabs available here like PowerShell, command prompt, Ubuntu, etc. I will now configure the launch options of the terminal from the settings menu. So whenever I do a startup of this terminal, by default the Ubuntu tab should get opened, and there are several other options that I can select. I will leave the customization to the user. When we install WSL, by default the bash shell gets installed. We can verify this by echoing the shell variable. We can also check the version of bash which is being used. There is another shell called ZSH, and we can see whether it exists or not. As it is evident, it doesn't exist, but we can install it from this command. The installation of ZSH requires me to input the password that I had set up during the initialization. The installation takes few minutes. After the ZSH shell has been installed, I will now update the packages of the Ubuntu system. I can now type ZSH and launch the Z shell. For now, I'm going to skip the customization of the Z shell, so I'll press Q. I will only install the OMyZ plugin manager, which will enable me to customize the Z shell further. Once I type the sudo password, I'm now presented with the OMyZ shell. I will now open another tab and check whether ZSH shell has been updated or not. Okay, so now my default shell is ZSH. The next step is to download Vscode. Go to your browser and type Vscode download. Based on your operating system, you can select which version of Vscode you want to download. So after the file is downloaded, run the setup, click on accept everything. Make sure you have added all the checkboxes and add to path selection is done. So your Vscode setup is now finished. You can launch it. Now that Vscode is installed, we will customize it by installing some extensions. The first one is the remote development extension. What it will do is it will let me connect to the WSL that we have installed. Once this extension is installed, I will also install other extensions. Like we have Python. It is showing in the popular category. If it doesn't exist, you can type in the name. Install the Python extension, and there are options like Jupyter, then Jupyter key map. You also have the options of live server in case you use HTML. Install IntelliSense code. This will help with the documentation part and auto completion. To develop anything on WSL, Vscode needs to establish a connection first. In order to do that, click on the left hand side icon, and from the drop down option select connect to WSL. Once this is done, on the left hand side you will see that Vscode is now trying to connect to the Ubuntu distribution that we have installed. So any development that happens will be done on the WSL Ubuntu distribution. You can check the current working directory that I am on. The next step is to install Python. We are going to install Python through Miniconda. Miniconda is nothing but a package manager that comes pre-installed with Python. There are limited number of packages that come installed with Miniconda, and it is up to you to install add-on packages as and when required. So scroll down to the Linux installer page, copy the link of the Python version that you want to install, and we would download the shell script that we will run in WSL. I'm now creating a directory in which the shell script will get downloaded. wget commands basically downloads the shell script from Miniconda. To execute the Miniconda script, I have to prepend bash to the downloaded shell script. The installation is done. Now, before I start the Conda session, I have to restart a new terminal session, and also there is the base environment which gets activated by default. In order to avoid this, I have to run this highlighted command, and by default the base environment will not get activated in our Conda sessions. This is done. Now I can check the Python version which is installed. It is Python 3.10. Also, I will check the Conda version which is installed as part of the Miniconda installation. Now let us try to look the Git version which comes installed with the Ubuntu. So it is using the recent one, 2.34. I will update I will update the Git version by using this command. Okay, this is already the latest package which is being used. There are no updates. I'm now going to configure some basic settings like the username and the email ID that I use for my GitHub account. I created a new Docker account, and from the Docker website I'm going to download the Docker desktop, which is for hobbyist or for some local development that you want to do. After downloading and installing the setup, I will launch Docker desktop from the start menu. When you launch Docker for the first time, it will ask a couple of questions to you, like what is the purpose of installing Docker, what is the job that you are doing, what designation you have, so on and so forth. After that information is filled in, right click on the taskbar and right click on the Docker image. Here we are going to enable some settings in case they are not. So you can choose whether the Docker desktop should run when you log in or when you start your system. The next important setting is to make sure that the checkbox for use WSL2 is checked. This will enable us to establish a connection to our Ubuntu WSL. You can also optionally choose to disable send usage statistics and other settings. I will go now to the resources section of it, and in that WSL integration. So the Ubuntu version that we had installed is now getting listed here. I will apply all the changes that we have done and the Docker engine will restart. In the terminal, I can run a hello world Docker program to see the installation was successful or not. this displays the Docker version which is installed. I'm now running the hello world program. Yeah, so it is pulling the latest image and we have hello from Docker. This message states that we have successfully installed Docker.